My name is Patricia Vieira, and I'm here with Monica Gagliano and John Ryan. We're the three of us, the editors of The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence. And we are very, very happy to announce that the book has been published, and we wanted to welcome everyone to the book launch. The book has been published with Synergetic Press, and we're really excited to share this moment with a number of friends and colleagues who made the book possible. So Monica and John, I don't know if you want to say anything at this very opening.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from all over the world. It's really exciting. As you will see in a moment, the map will show you exactly what a community this is. And we are really excited to see so much interest, so much excitement and support as well for this area of exploration, but also reflecting on how plants are becoming obviously important or recognized for their importance more and more. So I hope you enjoy this event, the launch for this very collaborative effort with humans and non-humans. And yeah, John, if you have a few words, go for it.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. We have close to 500 people registered for the launch and people from all time zones and around the world. So I think this shows the great interest in the plant revolution that's taking place at this moment. So welcome, and it's going to be a fabulous and rich session today. So thanks for joining us. And Patricia, over to you.
Okay, so I'll just give you a brief overview of what's going to happen. So we're going to start with a welcome to country. And since the book is published by Synergetic Press, which is located in Santa Fe, we have someone from a community from Santa Fe welcoming everyone to that particular location where the book is physically grounded, so to speak. And then we will have Leah Barkley from Arts Front, who is going to say a few words about how to use the platform that you're currently using to see this event. And then we will actually move on to a few of the people who are going to accompany us in this book launch and in this journey of the book launch. And we will have Dennis McKenna, who kindly agreed to write a foreword to the book, and he will be saying a few words about the book and how it intersects with his own interests. We will also have a few words from Jose Maria Paut, who is the illustrator of the book. And he will again talk to us about how it was to actually create images to illustrate all of the wonderful chapters that are in the book. And then in the final half of the session, after that, we'll have a musical interlude, which is going to be amazing. I'm sure everyone will love it. And then in the final half of the session, we will just have a more relaxed Q&A with the three of us, and also a friend who is going to moderate it. And everyone who is listening to us is welcome to post questions in the chat and to ask us anything you find interesting or intriguing about the book, and we'll be happy to try to answer. So this is what's going to happen over the next roughly 2 hours. We will now go ahead with the welcome to country, and you can also just check on the button of the console to see where we are in the course of this book launch. So once again, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have so many people registered for this event. And again, as John and Monica pointed out, it just shows that people are increasingly interested in seeing plants as part of a community of humans and non-humans. So we're very happy to be here with all of you and with all of the colleagues that made this book possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sengitiri, good afternoon. He's chande bipoave ne Santa Fe. Ogap ogigin e kanya day. Welcome to Santa Fe and what was known by our Tewa people as Ogapoge, which means the White Shell Water Place. My name is John Garcia. I'm from Santa Clara Pueblo, which is a village north of Santa Fe, about 20 to 30 minutes. Our Tewa people inhabit 6 villages in this part of the country of northern New Mexico in the Rio Grande Valley. Our people have lived here for hundreds of years. Before that, they occupied what was called the Pajarito Plateau, and that's near a place called Los Alamos. And of course, around Santa Fe, there were Tewa villages there in an area called Galisteo Basin, which is south of Santa Fe. Our people occupied a number of villages there. But throughout the years, after Santa Fe was established by the Spanish military and Spanish colonists that came out of Mexico, they were driven out from these lands by disease, wars, and other things. So they moved into these villages, and then some of them moved into Arizona to the Hopi tribes. But throughout all these years, we have endured. For the past 500 years, we have persevered, and we still go to school here in Santa Fe, Los Alamos. We still live there, and we commute to jobs in Los Alamos and Santa Fe. Los Alamos was where the atomic age started and the nuclear age started. Our grandfathers at that time were employed in menial jobs, janitors, busboys, landscapers, that sort of thing. But in 4 short generations, now our children are scientists and engineers. And our Tewa people have a wonderful characteristic called resilience. So that's how we've been able to survive all those many years. But I would advise that you visit some of the book sites around the country, around the world, that have references to the Southwest. And this will tell you the story of what happened in the past 400 years, where we have had 3 governments come in to our area. The Spanish government, the Mexican government, and now the United States government. So thank you very much for letting me say these few words. And again, welcome. Have a wonderful session, and may our ancestral spirits give you a wonderful day and a wonderful session. And good luck to you this season that we're coming into. Thank you. Kundawaha.
Good morning, everyone. What a privilege to have Welcome to Country from Santa Fe to start this event. And congratulations to everyone on the launch of this book. What an amazing collection of work this is. So I just want to give you a very quick introduction to the Artsfront platform. I'm going to share my screen very briefly, just so you can see how we can interact throughout this session. So you can obviously see everyone is commenting here. In the chat, you can post comments, you can post questions, and you can obviously post emojis as well. So as the presenters are speaking this morning, we would really encourage you to connect, ask questions. You're welcome to use English, Spanish, or Portuguese, and these will be shared with the presenters throughout the morning. You can also see the sessions. You can click through, interact with the different presenters and content. And if you want to explore the presenters specifically, if you click on the presenters panel, you are able to then actually click through to people's profiles and learn a little bit more about the work that everyone is doing. So we would definitely encourage you to come back after the session and engage with all of the community around this amazing publication as well. You can interact with the book contributors here, and then obviously this amazing community that involves all of you. So we have almost 500 people registered for this session. And if you want to see the location that everyone is joining us from, you can click on this map and you're able to see how truly international this community is. And each of these dots represents someone that is registered for this symposium. So you are then able to click through and actually interact with all of our delegates. So that is a very brief introduction to the ArtsFront platform. I'm going to hand you back to Patricia now, who will introduce our first presenter.
All right, thank you, Leah. And it's really an honor and a privilege to introduce our first presenter for our session today, Dennis McKenna. He really needs no presentation. Probably most of you joining us here today already know him. So I'm going to do a very brief presentation and then I'll just hand it over to him so that we can listen to him directly. He, of course, did the foreword of The Mind of Plants, and we as editors are very grateful for that. And we are also very grateful to have him here today. So Dennis, as I said, as most of you know, he's an ethnopharmacologist, and he has researched widely on botanical medicine and on the interaction between plants and humans, both at the individual and at the social levels. He has a doctorate from the University of British Columbia, and he has since worked at a number of research institutions. He taught courses in ethnopharmacology and botanical medicines in the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota for a number of years. And he's also a founding board member of the Heffer Research Institute, which studies the use of psychedelic plants to treat mental disorders. More recently, he has founded the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy that seeks to foster a deeper understanding of the interconnections between all living beings and to draw attention to the role of plants as both enablers and sustainers of life on our planet. So I'm very glad to have Dennis here today, and I'll just give him the word and let him take it over from here.
Okay, can everybody see and hear me?
Yes, you're
okay. So thank you, Patricia, for that great introduction. Mercifully short, that's the kind I like. And I want to thank ArtsFront and everyone, especially my friends at the Synergetic Press, for publishing this book, which I think is very significant as a way of focusing our relationships to plants. And that's becoming much, much more important as we confront some of the challenges that exist for our planet. Plants are running the show, as I often say. And the sooner we recognize that and start working in symbiosis with plants, the better off we'll be, and the plants will benefit, and the community of life will benefit. I want to mention, before I neglect, I've been asked by my friends at Synergetic Press to mention one of the publications that I have published with them, called ESPD 50, the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. which was the proceedings of a conference that I organized in 2017 in the UK. And then Synergetic Press published the proceedings volumes to that as a box set. There was an original conference in 1967 by the same name that was a closed conference. We republished that book along with the proceedings of the 2017 conference. If you want to look at that work or order it, you can go to Synergetic Press and search on ESPD 50 or search on my name, Dennis McKenna, and it will come up. It was actually kind of a landmark conference. It was the 50th anniversary of the first one. And the topics covered, I think, will be of great interest to many people in the audience. So check it out, or Google espd50.com and it will all come up for you. So, okay, shameless self-promotion aside, I want to just talk about the mind of plants and and the book and the idea of the mind of plants. I'm very thankful to Synergetic Press for inviting me to write the foreword to this book and also to participate in this conference. So what is the mind of plants anyway? I think the scientific community is increasingly coming around to the idea that plants actually have consciousness, a form of consciousness that's nothing like our consciousness, nothing like the consciousness in animals, but nonetheless is a true way of that plants have evolved of interfacing with their environment, with other plants, with other organisms in the biosphere. And a famous phytochemist, Tony Swain, once said, plants substitute biosynthesis for behavior. In other words, plants do not react to their environment through running away or standing and fighting. They're rooted in one place. Plants can't run away. They have to meet the challenges of their environment where they find them. And so in reaction to this, they have developed a language, and the language of plants is actually chemistry. And the result of this, plant substitute biosynthesis for behavior, you could turn that away and you could say plants' behavior is biosynthesis. Plants are incredibly creative, virtuoso chemists. And the reason for this is that they've mastered this little biochemical miracle. It's not really little at all. It is, in fact, the process on the planet that allows life to survive in the biosphere. And that's called photosynthesis. And green plants are the masters of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a mechanism by which they bring cosmic energy from the solar system, from the sun, basically. They capture that energy with light harvesting pigments like chlorophyll, and they use that energy to ionize water, to actually split water. And one of the byproducts of that reaction happens to be oxygen, conveniently enough for us, because we need oxygen to breathe. It's plants that are the source of that. And it uses the other half of the water molecule, the H part of the H2O, to reduce carbon dioxide, to grab carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and bind it to a receptor enzyme called ribulose diphosphate carboxylase. If you happen to like biochemical nomenclature, what I do, it's kind of a poetry. Ribulose diphosphate carboxylase grabs the carbon dioxide and holds it so that it can be reduced to simple sugars. That's the transition from inorganic to organic. And that's also the major mechanism by which carbon dioxide is sequestered out of the atmosphere and stored in organic substances, namely the biomass of plants. And then, of course, many things eat the plants, and that's how it's distributed. But this is how the balance of greenhouse gases is maintained within the narrow parameters that are tolerable to life. And unfortunately, primates, the most problematic species on the face of the planet, we're busy destabilizing these equilibriums, these homeostatic mechanisms. We're excreting so much carbon monoxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that the plants can't keep up. At the same time, we're cutting down the rainforest and other biodiverse ecosystems, which are the sinks for the carbon dioxide. So not only are they not able to keep up with what we're being produced, but we're re-releasing all of that carbon dioxide that's been bound into the body of plants for sometimes millions of years. So we're badly out of sync in terms of the homeostasis, the equilibrium that keeps our planet habitable. And we're now approaching the limits. So there is no bigger crisis that we're facing right now than the crisis of what are we going to do? What can we do to reestablish this equilibrium, or to get out of the way and let the earth heal itself, because it will do that. These feedback mechanisms are very resilient. They will reestablish themselves if we stop pushing the envelope. But if we don't, there's a real danger that we can break these systems and get into a situation where it cannot reestablish equilibrium. And we're getting perilously close to that. And climate scientists have predicted that if we do not get our act together by 2040, it will be too late. And the earth will quickly spiral into a situation where it is uninhabitable to at least large segments in large areas. So this is the crisis that we face. And plants have the answer. The answer is photosynthesis. And we have the answer. For one thing, grow more plants. And for God's sake, stop cutting down the rainforest. I mean, these are kind of no-brainers. The technology exists. All we have to do is acknowledge, and of course, always the problem is on the political level and denialism. And, some people do not inhabit the same reality that we do, but the reality is that the planet is in trouble. And if we don't acknowledge that, it is already forcing that realization on us. If you look at the latest extreme weather events and this sort of thing. So this is the crisis that we're facing. And we need to appreciate our plants and talk to our plants. And the plants have many ways to communicate them. And that's where the chemistry comes in. And if you've read the foreword to the book, you know what I'm talking about. Plants and humans have had dialogues on many levels for millions and millions of years. Hopefully we can preserve that. And, the earth should be a garden. With our help, it can be. There's no reason why it can't be habitable and beautiful for on into the future. But we do have some waking up to do. We have to wake up to the challenge that we face, and we have to wise up. We have to get wise in terms of the choices that we make going forward. And time is running out. So a book like this is very important to refocus on what our relationship with plants. There is no more important thing right now in climate science. So I'm slightly over my allotted time, so I'll let it go there. From there, thank you all for coming. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we can get into some of this in the Q&A to follow. So thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis. I saw in the chat that there are a few questions, so maybe we can have a 5-10 minute question period, and then we can move on to the next speaker. So one of the questions is by Stephen White, and he's asking, Dennis, did you have a personal lived experience of photosynthesis thanks to ayahuasca? And have you written about this? So I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that, but I invite you to share anything you might want to.
Yes, well, Stephen is right to ask that question, and and he's plugging his book, which is a great book, by the way, that was also published by Synergetic, and it's called The Ayahuasca Reader, edited by Stephen White and Luis Eduardo Luna. It's a Synergetic Press book. It's an amazing book if you want to learn about ayahuasca from many different aspects. And in that book, I contributed a chapter on my own personal experience with ayahuasca. One of my earlier experiences with ayahuasca that was very profound for me, where I experienced this process of ayahuasca, photosynthesis rather, from a molecule's point of view, specifically a water molecule's point of view. It's kind of a mystical experience, I guess maybe only a plant chemist can really appreciate, but it affected my life in an important way, because it brought home to me how important photosynthesis is as what is saved. And it brought home this message, which I repeat many times in many different places: the plants are running the show. And that goes for us and everything else on the planet that's not photosynthetic, because the plants are controlling the process by which life sustains itself. Everything that is not photosynthetic is essentially a parasite on plants.
Thank you for that. We have a number of questions, so I think we have some time, so I'll just go through a few more of them. Maybe I'll just read two at a time, and then you can try to answer both of them. Some of them dialogue with one another. So Deborah Perry, she's asking, how will humanity evolve enough to understand this dynamic and symbiotic relationship so that we as humans become a nourishing presence and not a parasitic, antagonistic one on this planet? So this is Deborah's question. And then there is another question. Do you think that by using meditation and by directing it, we can experience firsthand how plants experience the world? And can we access a network to feel the other organisms? So basically, how can we as humans try to imagine or experience the world from a plant's point of view?
Okay. Yeah, I can address both those questions. First, let me see. Yeah, so the question is, is everything working? I don't see my anyway. Okay. Yeah, the big challenge is that at this point, it's not about evolution. There's not time enough left for us to evolve. We need to step up really as a partnership in partnership with the biosphere, and try to take steps that will avert this impending disaster. And we do not have enough time. We don't have the luxury of evolution. Evolution took care of that a long time ago. What we have to do is identify what we can do to bring ourselves back into alignment with nature, and then implement and become a true symbiotic partner with the natural world, with the sentient community of life on the planet, and work together as a symbiotic partner rather than a dominator of nature to try to bring us back into alignment. And it's not too late to do this, but we have to do some major waking up, and this is what's very dismaying on the political front, because we depend on political institutions to respond to this, and they don't seem capable of doing it. They don't really appreciate the scope of the problem. So that is a challenge, and it's one of our own making. So there's that. In this context, I'd like to mention a very interesting book that was recommended to me and about 9 million other people, I guess, by Tim Ferriss, the podcaster. It's called The Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. He's a science fiction writer, and it is kind of science fiction, but it is actually a future history of the next 40 years. And it's an imagined history of what could happen if we do wake up in time. It's whether we wake up in time or not, it's going to be rough. But this is the most hopeful thing I've read in a long time about the solutions that may exist to respond to this. I highly recommend it. It is written as a story, but it's also chock full of many reviews of policy. In some ways, it's a policy manifesto for the next 40 years. And if we implement these ideas, we will make it. If we don't, well, in 40 years, it won't matter. Is kind of where it's at. So that's my answer to the first question. And the second one is, by using meditation and directing it, can we experience first plant how plants experience the world? Can we access a network to feel the other organisms? The answer is yes, we can. And that in this context, plant psychedelics are very useful, particularly things like ayahuasca and psilocybin. Psilocybin, of course, fungi are not plants, but they're close partners with plants. And somehow, for some reason, these psychedelics, particularly those in this tryptamine family, seem to help us focus on our relationship to the larger community of life. And many people report that this is their revelation, that this is their wake-up call when they think about how we fit into the scheme of things as a species and as individuals. We have to learn how to live in harmony, and we have to change we have to change almost everything about our lifestyle and what we think we know. But first of all, we have to recognize that the plants are running things. They have the answers and we don't. So that's what I will say to that right now.
That was a great line. Plants have the answers and we don't. If I may, I'd like to ask a question of my own, which is whether you have any hope that the COP26 that is starting now and will run into mid-November, whether you think there is any possibility that there will be some change brought about by that summit, or politically, how do we bring about the change that is needed? Because it would have to be quite a radical change.
Yes, it would have to be a radical change. And, I don't like to be a pessimist. I think that despair is not useful. But one has to wonder. It seems like political institutions are very slow to wake up, and things like the COP22, COP21, and the Paris Climate Accord, and all this. These are important and necessary initiatives, but nobody's taking it seriously. I think people go to these conferences and they say, "Well, we passed this resolution, or we've resolved to do better, or we'll do these things." Everybody goes home and forgets about it. Not everyone, but many people think, well, we did our thing. We went to the conference and we made, but then following through on these commitments, this is the difficult part. And I don't know how many of you follow US politics, but it's a good illustration of how difficult it is to move things forward. Biden, for all his faults and has a sincere concern about the environment and wanted to write legislation with substantial provisions to deal with climate change and gas emission and disaster mitigation and all of this stuff. And it's been like herding cats for him, particularly one particularly recalcitrant legislator, Joe Manchin, is able to hold the whole thing hostage. And this is the usual back and forth of politics, but in this particular case, by refusing to get on board with the climate change initiative, what this means is that there will be no opportunity to pass meaningful climate legislation, at least for another decade, because the Republicans probably will take over the government in 2022. God knows, I hope they don't, but many signs and all the pundits are saying this will happen. The Republicans don't even live in reality anymore, and they certainly don't acknowledge the reality of climate change. So if they're controlling the levers of power, it'll be, well, nothing, there's nothing going on, nothing we need to do, we'll just ignore it. So another decade goes before somebody with an ounce of common sense and understanding of science gets into office. Hopefully they'll be able to do something about it. But if we lose a decade, that's a critical decade. And by that time, my concern is it will be too late. It will be too late. We must make these decisions by 2035 or it won't matter. And I'm sorry, that's a dark scenario, but that's the way I view it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think many of us know that you're right. I have a couple more questions here. Let me just go for maybe one last round of three. One by Carol Sharp. She's asking that she's noticed a lot more growth over the last few years. I'm assuming she means growth of plants, and she's asking, do you think plants are flourishing with the increased CO2? And she says there's a study in the UK that seems to indicate this. So whether the increased CO2 in the atmosphere is promoting an increased growth of plants. Then Alejandro Moncrief is asking whether you believe that plants can inhabit a different time wave of consciousness, since they have a slower pace than we do as primates. And then Joyce Thompson, last question, is asking whether it is intentional or conscious evolution a thing, or is that the evolution itself? So whether evolution is intentional or conscious or not.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. These are all really, really good questions. Very interesting questions. The first one is easy to answer. It is true that as the atmospheric levels of CO2 increase, then plants will respond. Plants, CO2 is actually a food for plants, and so they use it in photosynthesis. So they will tend to proliferate more if there are high levels of CO2. They'll respond to that as part of this process of maintaining equilibrium in the environment. But that alone, is not going to do it, although it's an important factor. And this is why, it's very important to set aside large areas of biodiverse regions and just not touch them, let them do their thing. It's not that we're not using them, we're using them to maintain habitable conditions on the earth. So that's a pretty important thing. And again, it's going to have to happen at the international level, at the UN level or higher, that there's a consensus to protect these vanishing rainforests, because there are other carbon sinks like in the ocean, for example, but the rainforests are a major carbon sink. The Amazon is often called the lungs of the planet. And there's a reason for that. It is the lungs of the planet, So yes, that's part of the solution. The question about time difference is very interesting question. And it's long been of interest to me. It has to do with the speed of metabolism, right? In other words, metabolism is the biochemical processes that go on in every living organism. If it's not living, if it's not metabolizing, it's not living. Metabolism is the engine of biochemistry that drives life. But life tends to have different, different, I guess, ranges, you could say, of time. For example, a hummingbird has a very fast metabolism, and it lives hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seconds faster than we do. That's why hummingbirds are just a blur to us, because they're on a completely different, time frame. They're just much quicker, and they have shorter lives, but very fast lives. And then we're somewhere in the middle. We have our own speed of metabolism, but consider how different it is from that of a sequoia, for example, which lives thousands of years. The interesting thing is that there's an inverse relationship between the speed of metabolism and the perception of time. The slower you go, the slower your metabolism, like if you're a sequoia just sitting in the forest, the faster time apparently goes. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a sequoia, but I've asked a few if that's their perception. And that's the thing, for them, 100 years, even a millennium, is just a short span of time. It's just a blip, but if you are moving fast, like a hummingbird, or if you're moving fast, like, if you've ever been in an automobile accident, you may have that experience where time appears to slow down as you get pumped up and try to respond to the situation. So the faster you go, the slower time goes. The other one being the slower you go, the faster time goes. So I think that's an interesting difference about the way plants, for example, experience time. They live their lives on a much broader, much slower time frame than we do, and that's one reason that their perception is different. And then the question about intentional or conscious evolution, this is a rabbit hole that we can't really go down right now. Most evolutionary biologists will say evolution is not directed. It's not. Nobody is directing us toward more complexity or more enlightenment or so on, and I'm not sure that's entirely true, but evolution works itself out through natural selection. But there are other processes involved, such as epigenetics, that indicates there may be some kind of direction to evolution based on feedback from the genome, feedback to the genome from the environment. So it's not really clear. I think what evolution does exemplify is this intelligence that's built into nature, right? The intelligence is within nature, and it's not an external intelligence. Intelligence is just inherent in living things, and by intelligence I mean an ability to optimize your relationship with the environment. If that's not intelligence, I don't know what is. And we could take a lesson from plants and other organisms, because we're not very good at this, but that's a form of intelligence. And I think it's a reflection of kind of the inherent ingenuity and that is built into nature. Optimal solutions. This is what nature does. It develops optimal solutions, and plants are the masters of this because they have this language of chemistry, and that's how they do it. That's how they communicate with everything in the environment, other plants, bacteria and fungi in the soil, humans, animals that might want to consume them. If you've read the foreword to the book, this. Another wonderful book to recommend here is Finding the Mother Plant Finding the Mother Tree by Susan Simard. She is a field biologist, ecologist at the University of British Columbia, and her book is about these communication networks that exist in old growth forests. And I've just started this book. I'm familiar with her work, but it's a fantastic book. I can tell already it's going to be transformative. So I highly recommend it because this is not woo-woo science. This is not new age. This is solid science. And it's telling us some things about the way plants regulate these ecosystems, particularly the old growth trees, regulate the entire ecosystem to maintain its equilibrium and balance. So, and her work is published in multiple peer-reviewed journals. She's a real scientist, not a pretender of science. So highly recommend that book, Finding the Mother Plant by Suzanne Simard.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank Dennis for his generosity in answering all of these questions and in really engaging with our audience. And I also want to thank him once again for his foreword to the Mind of Plants. Thanks so much, Dennis, and thanks for being here with us today. We will now move forward to our next speaker, Jose Maria Paut. He is an archaeologist, but he also has a Master of Science in Archaeobotany from Leiden University in the Netherlands. And he was the illustrator for the Mind of Plants. So he did an illustration for each of the plants featured in the book. And we're very glad that he joined us here today to talk to us about this process of illustrating the book and of seeing plants not only from a scientific perspective, but also from an artistic perspective. So I give the word to Jose Maria.
Hi, hello everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction. And I wanted to congratulate all the team behind the book. And I wanted to thank everybody for letting me be a tiny part in this project, which I was really excited to be a part of. So yeah, I will be talking a little bit about the illustrations that I made for the book. And it may not be as interesting as the previous session, but I will try my best. So I think I will start talking a little bit about my background, because I have to say first that I do not have an artistic background. And when I was asked to do a presentation about my art, I was a little bit surprised and also a little bit scared, because I have never been asked to talk openly about this kind of stuff. So let's see how it will go this time. So yeah, my main occupation has not been being an illustrator. It's been focused mainly on archaeology. I've done plenty of other jobs, but my life has always been focused around archaeology and archaeobotany. This may seem at first a little bit unrelated to the topic of the book, but as I will mention later, I think the theme matched quite well to my interests. So I was also asked to talk a little bit about the process of me drawing all of the illustrations, but I think that before talking about the process, I should actually describe my style and explain it a little bit. I always talk about my style as a weird tribal style, not a conventional tribal style, mainly because I always say that I'm not good at either tribal style or realistic. So my style fits somewhere in the middle, if that makes any sense. But I do love this type of drawing, mainly because it gives me much more freedom to experiment, and I can be abstract whenever I want to, or I can be more realistic if I choose to. However, if I mix my tribal style with botanical illustration, which was the case for this book, then I have to have in mind that I do need to represent accurately every anatomical part of each plant if I want it to be correctly recognized by the reader. So my main concern when I was asked to draw 54 illustrations was to get familiar first with all the plants, because they are from all around the world, and be able to get good references on all the details, all the anatomical details, so I could just put it all together in the final drawing. So my main objective with all the illustrations was to make the reader able to make this personal connection to the drawing immediately, even before reading the chapter that the plant was about, especially because the book is filled with personal stories, and each plant is very personal to its author. So I kind of wanted to create the same relation between illustration and reader. So I was always worried about creating all the, making it very recognizable for the reader, just so everyone could relate immediately to the plant and say, for example, if they are reading about a passion flower, they could just say like, oh, that's the flower I have in my garden, or that's my grandma's favorite flower. So the reader will immediately have a personal relationship with that plant. So that was the goal. And I was also asked to talk about what my relationship was with these plants and the topic of the book. I think it relates mainly with my career path that seems unrelated at first, but comes together at I was confused for a little bit. So basically, when I was studying my bachelor's, I did a final dissertation on the use and consume of entheogenic plants between the Nahuatl cultures in Central America in pre-Columbian times. So that's where my interest for botanical knowledge and botanical background came to the surface, because it was a topic that made me see the vegetal world with different eyes. Because mostly I had to see from the perspective of the natives how they consider the vegetal environment, how they consider plants and trees as something more as just immobile elements in nature, but rather as living beings with consciousness, and they sometimes even consider them as gods. So by doing this study, which was mainly bibliographical, that's where my interest for botany sparked, my interest for botanical illustration developed. So this also led me to keep reading about plant consciousness and plant neurobiology. So it made me change my whole perspective about my studies. And this actually led me to choose a career path, which was archaeobotany. And I moved to the Netherlands in order to study my master's. And this also led me to continue my career in the UK. So I could say that this topic of plant consciousness actually has affected my life in very deep ways that I was not expecting at first. So mainly when I was talked to about this project and someone came with the idea to me and they offered me the opportunity to draw plants related with this topic, I immediately jumped in with the opportunity. And I really enjoyed it. And lastly, I will talk about how the texts in the book can relate also to the images I draw for the book. Because mainly when I'm drawing, sometimes there may be times where I get bored. And by bored, I mean that my illustrations are filled with tiny figures that come together to form a bigger picture. But that can be a very tedious labor. So sometimes I just like to introduce not so random figures and just introduce tiny figures that are not noticeable at first sight and they are kind of hidden, but they always relate to the topic of the book or either the topic of the plants. So I try to, in some of the illustrations I may have hidden, for example, in the red oak, I could hide tiny moths in each of the leaves of the plant. But it's not a random detail. It's because maybe the moths are the main animal consuming the acorns from the red oak. So it's always a small detail, a small, maybe a wink to the author or something like that, that I just like to add to maybe add a layer of extra detail. Unfortunately, I could not do that for every illustration because I had time limits and there were a lot of them. So some of them have them, and some of them don't. So it's kind of a Where's Waldo game that's included in the book. So maybe the readers will enjoy trying to find them. And I think that's all the time I have. So if anyone has any questions.
Well, thanks so much, Jose Maria. There are a few questions, and I was also wondering if you would show us, for those of us, I myself don't have the physical book yet, even though I've seen all of your drawings. If you have one or two that you're particularly fond of that you wanted to share with us and share with the audience so that they know what you're talking about concretely, because probably many people don't have the book yet. And then there are also a few questions coming up, but if you want to show just a couple of drawings, I'm sure everyone's curious to see them. There's also someone asking if you have a website to show your work. So if you want to post that in chat, I'll just share it with everyone later on.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I do have a few drawings. I had prepared a presentation, but unfortunately I'm really not good with this technology and I've never done a Zoom meeting before. So I could not actually show them online, but I do have some preprints around me. I don't know if you can see them very well. So this is the red northern oak, and I think maybe I can zoom in to see some details. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that I hide details somewhere. One that I was particularly fond of was the passion flower, just because I like the composition and I liked how it turned out and the color composition and the, yeah, I just liked it. I don't know why. Some others like this is the bean. So I just used elements where everyone could relate to, just like everyone has done this experiment in primary school where they just grow a bean. So I just liked to add it as part of the drawing. And also that gives me the opportunity to represent like the early stages of the plant, apart from like all the elements, like the leaves, the fruit and everything. Because I've been trying to make like the plant recognizable. So I try to put as many anatomical parts as possible. Even if my style is a bit abstract, I still want it to be easily recognizable by the reader, even if you're not an expert in botanical matters. And yeah, I mean, I have plenty of drawings, but I don't know if I have time to show them off.
Yeah, so I'll just get to some of the questions. So Jasmine Verdi from Synergetic, she wanted to know if there's a particular plant that that you connected more deeply to. I guess her question is not so much which drawing you liked most, but which plant you connected to more deeply. Then another related question by Rebecca Zamit. She's asking whether there's a particular family of plants that you enjoy working with more. So a particular group of plants that you find more, I guess, more engaging when you do your artwork. And well, I'll leave you with those two questions, and then we'll see if we have time for a couple more.
Yeah. So the first one was if there was any plant that I had a special link to them, right? So I especially enjoyed drawing the ones that that are present in my region, like horse chestnut or the olive tree. Actually, the olive tree, I modeled it after one really, really old olive tree that's in my neighborhood in Spain. So I just took inspiration from that olive tree. And I just drew it because there's just that connection of my hometown. But for example, horse chestnuts, just having to deal with them, it makes you remember certain periods of your time. Like, for example, when I just went as a kid to just recollect chestnuts with my family. So it was always nice to just have that moment to spend some time with a plant that normally maybe you don't even give that much attention to because they are everywhere and you just don't stop to look at them. But this gave me time to just like stop, look at them, and then memories come and you just make some reflections about it. So it was, I really enjoyed the process of drawing all these plants that were surrounding my area.
Well, I guess we have time for one final, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, there was another question, right?
Yeah, it was about the family of plants. If there is a the family of plants, but maybe I'll jump in and I'll ask one final question. And then if you want to later on share anywhere where people can find your artwork, there's a few questions on that, whether they can buy your artwork or whether you have a website, we can then post it on the live console. So the last question is whether, so there is the question about the family of plants, if there's a particular family of plants that you're more in tune with. And then the last question is whether you talked about your research about the Nahuatl speaking communities. And the question is whether you encountered stories of human beings being in conversation with non-humans when you did that kind of research. For instance, in teacher-student relationships. And of course, we know that plants are considered to be teachers in some communities. So I guess the question goes in that direction.
Yeah. So about the favorite family that I like to work with, I don't think I have a specific favorite one. I really like, it sounds cliche, but I really like every family of plants. I do have a favorite plant though, which is Mimosa pudica, just because of its behavior of just being a little bit more timid than the rest of the plants, which I always find quite funny. But unfortunately, it's a nightmare to draw. So I haven't tackled that one yet. But yeah, I don't have a preference for a family. I always like to go from one to the other because they all present a different challenge when illustrating. And about the Nahuatl, I did this research quite a few years ago, so it's not really fresh. But yeah, I do remember like having to tell about all these experiences of basically medicine men that they were called in Nahuatl cultures, using plants to communicate with either the patient because it was used as part of their medicine. So there were plenty of stories of just these people who ingested plants in order to communicate with either the patient, to localize the sickness, or maybe to break the barrier with between mortals and immortals, or to communicate also with nature. And also most of the religions in Mesoamerica had this origin in Euro-Siberian shamanistic traditions, and that's how these religious practices came into South America in the first place. So there was always that heritage of shamanistic traditions in which people basically communicated with the animal world, or they became one even with in some of the testimonials. It was funny because I had to study this from the perspective of Spanish colonizers. So they were just telling all these stories in such a sometimes demonized way, which was funny to read about, which I would definitely like to keep researching that topic, but unfortunately I haven't had the chance.
Well, again, I think our session is, or this part of our session is coming to a close, but I wanted to thank you, Jose Maria, well, first of all, for the wonderful illustrations you made for our book and for being here with us today and talking to us a bit about that process. And I wanted to thank Dennis McKenna once again, both for his foreword and for his presence here. Thanks so much. And we'll now have a short musical interlude so that everyone can, maybe stand up, stretch your legs, relax a little bit. And then we will move on to the second half of the session today, which will be basically a Q&A with the three of us editors and two guests. So I'll now pass it over to Monica, who is going to do the introduction to the musical piece.
Thank you, Patricia. And wow, amazing start. Thank you so much, everyone. So many themes, topics touched, and some very important things discussed, and very grateful. And it's a great honor to be able to introduce January. I'm gonna read a little brief bio for her. But I highly recommend that you take it easy, take the music in. It's not just music. This is a real medicine that she shares. And I had the very great privilege to be sitting and listening with her playing many times. And I'm so grateful that we can share that with you now. So January is a recognized healer for people with chronic illness, and she's also, of course, a multi-instrumental frequency musician. She's been using healing foods and sound therapies, and she healed herself from a very debilitating illness that basically modern medicine couldn't support. So she continues to support people around the world with mystery illnesses to bring them back to life and to health. But of course, as a musician, she's got a deep love for world cultures. And so her music is a unique blend of earthly sounds driven from the roots of her island home, from the Philippines, and has performed on the world stage with highly regarded artists. She's also part of a beautiful ensemble, the Encoda Symphony Orchestra and the Encoda Trio in Perth, WA, like Western Australia, in Australia. And again, I really encourage you to explore their website, explore their music. It's just incredible. And I just want to leave the space for her to let you experience her directly. So enjoy. Thank you, January, again for coming. I know it's very early morning for you. And yeah, on to January. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. And I'm so honored to be here. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, all good.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't really feel I need to introduce myself so much since I has already been introduced. But I will say that I have such love and deep respect for plants that have always been with me from, my goodness, the time I can remember, ever since I came to this world. And I've connected with plants and spoken to them, and they have spoken to me in so many ways, on so many levels, and I have never left that. It's always been part of my journey, especially with my health. I've tried everything that you can imagine. I've gone everywhere. I've gone from one practitioner to one practitioner, and there wasn't anybody that could really help me and get the healing that I needed until I basically I fell down to my knees and I really asked to be supported and what it is that I needed for this body to come back to life again. And my intuition and I suppose, spirit came through to me and had guided me to the world of plants in a way where I never thought I could imagine going. And it became so just so amazing, and there's no words for it. I can't thank plants enough, and they are such a big part of my life, and I feel so blessed and so honored to be here and sharing just one of the songs that I have written for plants and my respect for them. And so this is an ode to the plants from all of us. Maglibya ka, maglibya ta kitang duha. Maglibya ko, maglibya ta kitang duha. Maglibya ko, maglibya ka, maglibya ta kitang duha. Maglibya ko, maglibya ta kitang duha. Ha 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 ha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Magtanom ko ang plantas ko, pero di ko magtrabaho. Ini kaayo ang gawas, no. Diri na lang maghuwat ko, kay dugay pa ka maabot. Maghuwat ko nimo. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Mahal kita, puso ko, mahal kita. Mahal kita, ay ang puso ko, mahal kita. Siempre abot na kadiyari ni musika, para nimo magkanta tangalipay laka sa pinangga kakahibalo niya. Dugay pa ka maabot, maghuwat ko nimo. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ka, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Maglimpia ko, maglimpia ta kitang duha. Mahal kita, puso ko, mahal kita. Mahal kita, puso ko, mahal kita.
Well, thank you. That was such a powerful journey that I think you took us on. It is my absolute honor to follow this by opening the last session of today's book launch. And I'd like to do so in a way that I think has been facilitated by this beautiful journey that you took us on in January. And it is by acknowledging the countries that we all inhabit. And the concept of country that I use is the concept that the Aboriginal people of Australia have shared with me over the years. That is not just a geopolitical entity, but rather a metaphysical worldview that predates and has continued virtually unchanged throughout the entire colonial period. In the words of Annie Barbara Nicholson, country is the total sum of all the beings and phenomena with which we share our space and our time right now. But more than that, country is the total sum of the relationships and interactions among and with these beings and phenomena. And even more than that, country is the total sum of the stories within which these relationships are contained and construed. And so with this in mind, I want to pay respect to the knowledge holders of these stories, the elders who were, the ones who are, and the ones who are yet to be. And Annie Barb always reminds me that country is also not just a space or a place in space, it's also a place in time. And so with that in mind, I want to acknowledge everyone present here today, because in sharing this time, each one of us contributes to this special place in time, to this special country. And my name is Alessandro Perizzon. Among other things, I'm one of the co-founders and executive committee members of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And I am zooming from the country that the ancestors have entrusted the Narakwal people of the Bunjalung group with looking after. And so with that in mind, I acknowledge everyone's country and everyone's time. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the three speakers and editors who need no introduction, but nonetheless, to follow with the expected protocols. I'm honored to introduce. John Ryan is an environmental writer and plant enthusiast, and he's also an adjunct associate professor at Southern Cross University and an adjunct senior research fellow at the Nulungu Research Institute at Notre Dame University. Patricia Vieira is a senior researcher at the Center of Social Studies of the University of Coimbra and a professor of Spanish and Portuguese at Georgetown University. Monica Gagliano is a research associate professor in evolutionary ecology and a former fellow of the Australian Research Council, who's currently based at the Southern Cross University, where she directs the Biological Intelligence Lab funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And finally, Louis Daly will be a reader for today and will intersperse, as I will explain in a second, the questions that we will open this session with a few extracts, short extracts, but really powerful ones from the book itself. Louis is a lecturer in social anthropology of the environment at UCL, and his research focuses primarily on multi-species engagements and indigenous culture and cosmology. So without any further ado, what I would suggest to do is that I may actually exercise my moderator privilege and start with a couple of questions, and then allow the three editors to speak to these questions, hopefully briefly, so that then we can then open up to questions from the audience. And once the questions are answered, however briefly, then I will ask Louis actually to do the readings in between. So let's start straight away with the title of the book, The Mind of Plant. Why the mind? Why choosing the term mind? What do we mean by using the mind in relationship to plants? Who would like to begin?
Obviously,
I'd be happy
we're all
to
terrified.
begin.
Go, John.
I'll be happy to begin. Thanks so much for moderating our session, Alex. And I think with the idea of the mind of plants, it's also a provocation. We wanted to emphasize also the different nuances of the term mind. In one sense, there's this incredibly exciting and burgeoning scientific research into plant intelligence that suggests plants are minded. Yet in another sense, there are the myriad ways in which people mind or pay no mind to plants, care for and attend to plants, but also disregard and destroy them. So the title, I've realized also, is that it implies a kind of unitary plant mind, a collective intelligence in nature, out of which the minds of individual plant subjects might arise. I think the last point I want to make is that the book shows the many ways in which the idea of the mind of plants can be interpreted, as well as the importance of stories. So that's why the subtitle, Narratives of Plant Intelligence, of Vegetal Intelligence, is important. The way in which stories allow us to understand the nuances of this idea of the mind of plants, to understand it poetically, artistically, through literary means, through personal means, through spiritual means, and through scientific frameworks as well. Monica or Patricia?
Well, maybe I go next. I mean, obviously, I can hear from your voice, Alex, that the question was meant to be provocative, and you're provoking the provokers. So, as John put it beautifully, it was intentionally awkward. Using that word as a title was meant to be awkward and uncomfortable, unstable. It's meant to make the reader think whatever they want to think the mind is for them. And the entire book, I think, was it came about or it unfurled. It sprouted just like plants would grow and sprout in a kind of unruly way. There are some rules, but you don't really control, and you don't really know what the plant is going to do, how fast it's really going to grow, if it's going to flower, if it's going to fruit. You can do the best that you can. You can put the right soil, the right ideas in there, but then it's going to do whatever it wants inside the soil that you planted it in. And so the idea was we could tell you what mind is if we knew, if we had a very clear definition. But actually, we rather leave that ambiguity to you to work out, to feel that uncomfortable space where you need to work out what does it mean to you, and you need to work out whether is it that important for you to know what the mind, as you think of your mind, would look like in a plant, then go and explore. Or if you're taking it as like minding, in looking after and taking care of, then is the question returns to the reader, is like, are you minding your plants? Are you connecting with your plants in a way that is mindful and full of care? Or are you just mindless about them, and then expecting them to be mindful in return? And it's like, so it's inviting this reciprocal interaction where you need to engage with this other to discover what mind is in the plant, but then probably most importantly, to discover what is your mind. What is it that you define as the mind that you think you know it is? So Patricia, you might want to explore more.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the issue of the mind, because many of our contributors saw their plants really as companions, as teachers, sometimes even as beings that push them forward in both in their thoughts or in their work, so in various areas of their lives. And so with mind, I think we also there was also the issue of the plants having a mind of their own. And we know that in some traditional communities, plants are perceived as teachers that create, generate, and even transmit knowledge to humans. And also there was another element to this issue of the mind, which was the ways in which that mind of the plant, of a particular plant, then interacts with the minds of humans, and this is very clear in psychotropic plants. For instance, we have texts on ayahuasca, on cannabis, and so on. But I think it also happens with other plants, that through a close connection to a specific plant, the mind, or I guess the being of that plant, ends up interacting and intersecting with the being of a particular human that is in close contact with that plant. And so I guess we didn't want mind to resonate along the lines of the division between mind and body, because that doesn't happen in plants at all. So we're not going back to the old Cartesian division between the mind on the one side and the body on the other. So by mind, I think we meant an embodied mind, a mind that works in and through the body of both humans and plants. And it's in that embodied and embedded relationship that the mind of the plant touches the mind of the particular person who wrote a given chapter or poem, or who contributed to the book.
Well, thank you all. That they definitely very rich answers. Lewis, over to you for the first reading.
Thank you. The first reading is from Robin Wall Kimmerer's chapter, White Pine. When I come beneath the pines into that particular dappled light, time slows and I fall under their spell. My science brain and my intuitive brain are both alight with knowing. It is the spaciousness of the leafy vaulted ceiling. Maybe the terpenoids in pine vapors exert a psychological influence, producing an altered state of tranquil alertness. Perhaps it's the quivering energy of electrical micro-discharge from the needles. Maybe we're humbled simply by their size. Is it the sound of boughs rising and falling, like slow breathing? There's something there we sense but cannot name, a feeling akin to sitting quietly in the presence of an elder. So it is with pines. You want to slip into their circle and listen. My favorite place to read on a summer day is leaning against the bole of a big old white pine. There's almost always a hollow there, upholstered in a coppery brocade of pine needles with comfy armrests of the buttressed roots. which hold up the pillar of pine rising 200 feet above me. These piney points above the lake's water are beloved in the north woods, for the sand and granite below, sun and wind above, and a view across the lake, which at this moment is dancing up white caps in the breeze. In this woodland library, I have one book on my lap and the other against my back, one written on cellulose, one written in cellulose. When I sit with white pines, I wordlessly come to know things that I didn't know before.
Thank you. Let's move to then the layout of the book, because the chapters are divided and organized by vernacular names, just very much like the old herbaria, but they subvert the whole old herbaria in the very nature of what the book is trying to do by focusing on interactions, exchanges, dialogues between plants and humans, between plants themselves. So how do you think that the book achieves this? And just to change the order, maybe Patricia, I'll ask you to start.
Well, thank you for that question. And we actually, as editors, reflected quite a bit about how we would organize the book, and there were various ideas. And then in the end, we ended up deciding that we would follow an alphabetical order by plant. Of course, this is what was done in traditional herbaria, and we wanted to dialogue with that tradition, but at the same time to move away from that, because we're not dissecting a plant as an object, but really dialoguing, or each author in the book is dialoguing with that particular plant as an equal. And so one of the purposes of organizing the book by plant name was to signal that the plants are really co-authors of each of the chapters and poems in the book. So it's not like it's a chapter about a specific plant, but it's a chapter also by that plant. And I think many of our authors would agree that the plants they discuss in their texts are, to a certain extent, also the ones who helped them write those texts. And so organizing the book alphabetically by plant points in that direction of giving plants a word, so to speak, acknowledging that plants are also authoring some of those chapters, and they're not just the objects of knowledge, but really the ones who are the subjects or the agents, if we want, of that particular act, which is so human, the act of writing, right? So plants are also contributing to the book in that sense. And now that the book is being printed, I mean, there's another level to that, because they've given their body for the printing of the book. So we have another layer of plant collaboration in this whole process. So I think this then multiplies into other directions as the book gains a physical existence.
Beautiful.
And if I might add on that, thank you, Patricia, because you reminded me of something. You know, the herbaria were a scientific collection of the dead bodies of plants. Actually, you had to dry them to make sure that they stay nice and neat for a long time. So the herbaria, like much of the culture that the herbaria belongs to, which is a very colonial, techno-scientific culture, was about death and taking from other places and killing for the sake of collecting and showcasing in other places. So removing the importance of place by removing them from the original place, and then expecting death to represent life. And so the idea of the book was to bring the plants alive within the text. so that there is no dead body anywhere. If anything, in some cases, it is the human that needs to go through a mini death to be able to relate with these kind of plants. And so, but it's a regenerative death. It's not a death that causes more and more death, which is what the colonial approach has perpetuated in everywhere where it has been, which is everywhere. So yeah, I think that the readers will have fun, because the diversity of essays there, and the diversity of approach, and the diversity of how different humans interact with different plants will inspire them to find their own place. And so it allows for place to reemerge, and also for potentially new relationship to emerge. Like we have, for example, an essay on coffee by Joe Dammit, and it's a beautiful essay, because coffee, I mean, like, who doesn't know coffee? And yet coffee comes from a very specific place in the world, and we never really stop much about thinking about that. And coffee can be very regenerative, as we all know, especially in the morning, but it can also be quite damaging if you overdo it. So there is this again, this ambivalence, this awkwardness in relating to plants, and the relationship that comes between these two beings, the human being and the plant being, that needs to find a space of reciprocity, a space of compromise. And so I think that the book is trying to constantly find that place of uncomfortableness and then compromise. It's like instead of like the classical barrier, which was like, this is how these plants are. This is a dead plant, but this is the plant, and take my words for it, because these are the information that I have collected, and this describes this being. The barrier actually don't describe very much about the plants at all, if in the end, because they don't describe about the relationship. So yeah.
I'd just like to add to that one of the ways I think the book achieves the goal of dialogue is through the power of the story. And I've realized through this book that everyone has a story about plants or a plant, regardless of our cultural backgrounds, our religious subscriptions, our political affinities, our occupations or levels of expertise. Everyone has a story about a plant, whether it's a house plant, a wild plant, a plant that's touched us spiritually, a plant that's healed us, right? And so these stories are great archives of human plant knowledge. And plants, of course, they can be understood through scientific analysis, and that's sort of the dominant paradigm of understanding plants. But these stories are also lenses for knowing plants and for knowing about human relations to plants. The stories in the book accentuate the dialogues and exchanges between plants and beings who are other than plants. And in this sense, the plant itself becomes a story. It becomes a process. It becomes a being constantly undergoing transformation rather than a fixed and isolated phenomenon that the herbarium tradition tends to uphold, right? So ultimately, I see the book inviting a rapprochement between the different ways of knowing plants, between the scientific, the indigenous, the cultural, the artistic, poetic, and the myriad other ways, the intuitive, the myriad other ways of knowing plants in a grounded empirical way. And I think we also, in organizing the book as such, we wanted to pay homage to the herbarium tradition, but also move it into the domain of the unpredictable, the indeterminate, the stochastic, right? The intuitive, and hopefully that the book has done that.
Thank you. And I'll pass it over to Luis for another reading, but after which I think actually we'll open up to the floor for questions from the audience. Thank you.
The second reading is from Luis Eduardo Luna's chapter on ayahuasca. 48 years have passed since my first encounter with Yahe. Nearly everything I've done over all these years has been related to these plants in one way or another. To this day, even so, the fundamental mysteries remain, and I do not feel any closer to any grand truth that would satisfy my rational thinking. At this point, I just need to let go of alkaloids, receptors, and brain circuits, and only focus on the many experiences I have had. The question has always been, is it all me? Are all these characters that interact with me, as in dreams, merely aspects of myself, or are they entities disguised in shapes and cultural clothing I can somehow recognize, struggling to communicate their important messages, perhaps about life, the environment, the predicament of existence itself? Indigenous Amazonian people, like traditional societies all over the world, apparently understand these matters quite clearly. Plants, animals, lakes, rivers, mountains, the sun, the moon, the stars, the wind, all have personhood. Their lives are embedded in animistic cosmologies, which we humans are but one type of being among a myriad of non-human persons. Accordingly, we as humans occupy a middle position in a complex world of intelligent exchange with higher and lower body minds, some plainly visible, some invisible to the untrained eye. Their epistemology is relational and firmly based in first-hand experience and the senses, as well as in the imagination. Yahe, ayahuasca, and other plants and fungi can facilitate this perception, even to people who, like us, have been raised in worlds either devoid of spirit or with definitive dualistic ideas of the sacred, usually separated from the biological world.
Thank you. It's beautiful to see how the book, the plants, the editors and the authors are really coming into this conversation. And so I think it's time to extend this conversation into or to the audience as well. And we received already a number of questions. The first one is from Alejandro, who asks whether you believe that, do you believe that awareness and presence are the appropriate spaces to establish an intimate relationship with plants? So any of the speakers, Monica, just to change the order.
I just turned my mic on. Well, if we think of any relationship, let alone plants, but like in any relationship, what do you want to bring to a relationship? Awareness and presence, or you're not really present and aware of the other. So why would we think that to create a relationship with a plant or anything else, or anybody, I should say, anyone else, should be any different?
John, Patricia?
I do think seasonal awareness of a plant is a great way to establish intimacy. Observing the plant over the seasons of that particular region. In Australia, there are multiple seasons depending on the region. There might be 6 in the traditional indigenous view. There might be 2, 3, or 4. So attuning to the seasons of where we live and knowing that plant over the seasons is important. And in terms of presence, if we can think of plants' capacities for sense themselves, for not being sensed, but for sense itself. So for touch, for taste, for smell, for other even kinesthetic awareness in plants, then presence seems to have a very vital importance in terms of our presence with that plant and the sensory exchanges that can occur, so that it's not us seeing the plant but being seen. It's not us only smelling the plant but being smelled, and so forth. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add to the answers that the book also teaches us, or the various chapters in the book teach us that there are various or many ways of being present and aware, and of course the plant world is very varied, and we talked about the issue of time before, and how plants perhaps sense time differently. But of course, it really depends from plant to plant. I mean, we have tiny plants that probably have a much faster life cycle, and then we have trees that live for thousands of years. And so what our chapters, and what I at least learned from the chapters and the poems and everything in the book, is that this presence and this awareness really changes a lot, not only depending on the person who is connecting with a specific plant, but also depending on the plant itself, because the plants are just so varied in form and shape, and depending on the various places of the world where they are, they express themselves in different ways. And so our writers for the book, they showed us that really you have to learn how to be with a specific plant and to be attuned to the differences of that plant. And I think that's one of the riches that one gets from the book, to learn to be attuned to these very different ways of being and of existing. When I was listening to Jose Maria, I was also making myself aware of that, of the variety of plants we have in the book, and how one can engage with them in so many ways. I mean, some of the plants are plants that we humans often eat. We have, Jose Maria showed a drawing about the bean, for instance. So it's a plant that probably pretty much everyone has eaten before. We have plants, we have trees, we have a number of trees in the book. And we heard Louis read an excerpt from Robin Kimmerer's text on the pine. They are, of course, the plants that influence the human brain. We talked about ayahuasca, cannabis, even coffee, and so on. So there is a very wide range of interactions with plants, and very different ways of being aware of that plant and of relating to that plant. And I think if there's something that the chapters in the book teach us, is really how important and how central plants are to the most basic acts of human existence and experience on the planet. And this is something that I think the various parts of the book illustrate quite well.
Thank you, Patricia. Rebecca asks a very pragmatic and yet metaphysically profound question. She asks, how can we collaborate with plants to produce art? And I imagine any kind of art, be it visual, tactile, or any kind of art. But how can we collaborate with plants to produce art without necessarily taking away the body and life of a plant?
I guess John's the person to answer this.
Well, we do have a contributor, Guto, to the book, who works collaboratively with plants. And this is a huge area, in fact, of visual art, of writing, and other forms of art. And the question is precisely that: how do we collaborate with a plant? How do we elicit the intelligence of a plant, the creative capacity of a plant, in a work of art without killing the plant, without violating its ethical status, and so forth. And so I would invite you to read Guto's chapter. There's been some longstanding models. One, in the interactive art world, there's a lot of work being done on the ways in which plants signal electrically and then converting differentials in electrical signal into works of art. So that's one example. In my own work of writing poetry, I try to understand how a plant contributes to that act of composition, and through its, what I call interpolations, how it inserts itself into the text. So it's a fascinating question, and perhaps Monica, I know Monica's worked with interactive artists, and Patricia, I'd love to hear what you have to say as well.
Well, Goethe is an amazing example, actually, because, and I really invite people to check his work out, because it's really incredible how, he allows the plants to express herself with the interface of technology, which is in a way extending the space for the human mostly to connect with plants in a way that, bridges the time-space difference. It's almost like we are in two different time-space zones, and technology can be used, as we're doing right now, to bridge and connect. So I think that it's a very good example of art that can actually bring more out of the plant rather than reduce it to something that is a dead body again. I'm aware of time, so I think I'll leave it there.
Patricia, do you want to have a comment, or shall we go to the next question?
We can move so that we get more questions.
Perfect. And I think actually we have time for two more questions. If we have like some quick answers, I imagine. So the first one actually is from Iman. And Iman asks whether the panelists could comment on Richard Powers' The Overstory, and whether the two books might be related but also different.
I can go ahead and just talk a little bit about that. I actually read The Overstory just a couple of months ago, so it's fresh in my mind. Well, I guess, of course, there are some basic similarities. So both books are about plants, and both books highlight the centrality of plants in human lives. Of course, I think a major difference is that in our edited book, we have a collection of authors. So we don't have one central narratorial voice that guides you through the book, even though The Overstory is also fragmented. So it starts as different chapters or strands that then come together in one major story. Our book is completely fragmented. So it's a collection of approaches to plants, so to speak. So each author presents his own take on a specific plant, and his relationship to that plant, how that plant shaped her work, her life, in many, many different ways, right? And so we wanted to give our authors autonomy to just develop a specific topic in whichever way they wanted. And in fact, when we invited people, we let them choose which plant they were going to write about. So we didn't impose a plant onto people. The only restriction was if someone was already writing on that plant. So we had the list and we kept updating it. And so if that plant was taken, we would ask someone to write on a different plant. But otherwise, we wanted people to feel free to really work with a plant that they have a close connection to. And so our book is purposefully dispersed and disseminated. And in that, I think it is quite different from The Overstory.
Thank you.
And can I add one comment, Alex? It's just that this is, I think, is quite important. Is like, the other story is based on, new science and all of that, but it's a fiction. It's a story that someone made up. While we invited the authors to write their actual personal experience. So our book is a collection of many experiences that are actually personal and real to the person who is experiencing them. And that is a major thing, because fiction, of course, is a very powerful way to deliver certain messages, but in a way, non-fiction can be even more powerful, because if all our authors could connect to their plants in so many different plants in so many different ways, surely there is one way that will inspire you reading the book that's like, oh, I could connect that way too. That resonates with me. And you don't have to just read the book because it's pleasurable, but you can actually use it as an instruction manual to see like, okay, if I want to connect with plants, which way can I do? And you got, I think we got something like well over 40, 50 different contributions. So you got that many ways of connecting and playing and trying.
Thanks, Monica. And in the interest of time, I think actually there's a final question that I think would really work perfectly to conclude this dialogue. And if I can actually build upon the question which comes from Mauricio, and the question asks whether there were some insights reading the text that you, as editors, received in the process of editing the book. But if I can actually build upon that, how would you capture that into a short 1-minute summary of the journey, the editorial journey that you have been on?
Sure, I'd be happy to comment there. I've learned, once again, that multidisciplinary perspectives are important to understanding the natural world. And thinkers have been saying this for centuries, of course, Goethe and Thoreau and E.O. Wilson and many others. But it really is what became more apparent to me editing the book, and that these sorts of exchanges between the arts, humanities, social sciences, and sciences, and activism as well, are extremely important in an era of specialization, and also an era in which the higher level of specialization coincides with climate change, the emergence of the Anthropocene, the loss of biodiversity. So there's something to be said about broad-based thinking, and I think that's what came through most for me in editing the book.
Monica or Patricia?
I go, okay. For me, it was, I think it was a very transformational process, because the plant that I chose to write on is wheat, but that wasn't my first choice. And my choice changed multiple times. And as the editor, I had to give, the space to the contributors. So it's like, oh, and then this plant is taken by someone. Oh, and this other plant is taken by someone. So I kept changing. And in the end, I had to write about the plants that I really had to write about. And so what I learned in both editing as well as participating and contributing to the book itself is the fact that this was really a co-creation between two different species, in this case, many different species, the plant species, the plant kingdom, and the human on the other side. And as you will see, like some of the kind of famous plants that you might expect to be there are not represented. Like, for example, there is no tomato, or there are some plants that you think, oh, surely someone brought about this, but it's like some plants that you would expect them to be there are not there, and some other plants that you're like, and what is this plant? Is present. And it really feels to me these were the plants that really wanted to talk. They really had a story that wanted to be shared, and they picked on the right humans to in a way transmit that. And we were very lucky that our contributors, despite, I'm pretty sure, some of the resistance that they found in, oh, do you really want me to be that person? Or that, yeah, it has to be personal. We kind of together as a group, as a multi-trans-kingdom group, we had together find a place where we can allow each other to be penetrated and be permeated and be transformed. And so, yeah, I'm so proud of everyone that contributed, because I know that, and including myself, like it required the courage of really engaging with that space and then allowing whichever plant wanted to speak to do so. And I think everyone did so well. So yeah, thank you to all of the contributors.
Patricia, would you like to say a few closing words?
I'll just add a couple of sentences. So I think what was most surprising for me was really allowing myself to be surprised really by some of the contributions and even some of the methodological approaches. So John talked about interdisciplinarity, and of course we always have our disciplinary biases. I studied literature, so of course I was going to appreciate the stories that were more literary in nature. But then I ended up liking a lot some of the contributions that were very personal and had perhaps were not so focused on narrative, but really explored some connections that between humans and plants that really sounded to me to be very genuine and maybe didn't have the literary appeal, but had other sorts of appeals. So I was actually challenged to get out of my comfort zone and to learn not only disciplinarily, but also to learn about plants that I never even had heard of. So there were some plants as we were editing the book that I went and looked them up on Google because I had no idea what they looked like. Of course, there was a linguistic component there because English is not my first language, but even in my own Portuguese, there were some plants I had never heard of. And so it was a learning experience about the variety of plants, a learning experience about the variety of connections people establish with plants, and about different writing styles, and to be impressed by that variety and by that diversity, I think was what stuck with me the most. So I was impressed that there was such a variety and that we managed to actually convey and bring that variety into just one volume. I was very thankful to everyone who contributed and who brought that richness into the book.
Thank you. Thank you all. And I think actually this is a perfect conclusion. And I think I can invite everybody to join me in a virtual applause. Unfortunately, by not having an audience, we can only have this virtual applause here. And we lack that interaction between the audience and the speakers that otherwise we would have in person. And Dennis has included a very beautiful sentence to close that says, he says that all plants have a story if anyone bothers to listen. And if I can build upon that, no, it's not only the things that grow, that crawl, that swim, and that fly that have a story to tell, but the entire cosmos does. Rivers, winds, rocks, the entire cosmos has a story if one bothers to listen. So thank you, Dennis, for that. And I'd like to thank the editors for taking and leading us in this journey and facilitating this space. And, in the word of Lao Tse, the true leaders are the ones who are never recognized as such. They're the ones who serve, and their followers hardly recognized as leaders. And so this is a true act of leadership in the Taoist tradition. So thank you for doing that. So thank you, Monica, John, and Patricia for doing this. And I'd like also to thank Luis, Jose Maria, January, and Dennis for their voices, for adding their voices to today's discussions. But rather than concluding with these thanks and the voice of humans, I think it's the best way to conclude today is through the voice of the book itself and the way that the text channels the dialogue. So, Luis, may I invite you to conclude today's launch with the final reading from the book itself. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you. The final reading I'll do is from Estela Calderon's chapter on corn. Now that time has almost placed 50 years on my back, and the world's population is feeling the shock of COVID-19, a novel virus that has unleashed fear, sickness, isolation, and death, I have to say that my days are easier to bear if I reconnect with the little girl I was in a place where the cultivation of corn was a fundamental part of my family life. It's as if the mind of this indispensable plant, a plant that is part of my own Amerindian culture, was connected to mine by means of my memories. Corn is also what roots me. In my everyday life, corn represents a point of departure and a return to the images of my ancestors. It is as significant as my umbilical cord and my brothers and sisters that my mother buried with the placentas on the land of her small farm. She decided this place was where her 8 children would be born, with the assistance of a midwife named Margarita. I was the youngest. She returned the placentas and umbilical cords that joined us to her like a root that nourished us to the land in order to nourish us further from a greater mother. My mother planted me like a grain of corn, loving the spaces I came to know while I was in her womb. Strangely, all my siblings have an enormous attachment to our point of departure. Each one of us has a piece of land in that place. I had the good fortune of becoming, over time, the owner of Santa Ana Farm. Every time I return to Nicaragua, the country where I was born, I visit the farm, my favorite place in the world, so I can plant more seeds of flowers that attract butterflies, hummingbirds, and bees. It is a measureless gift from my grandparents' spirit and from the millions of open arms that received me during my unrepeatable childhood, and that I hope will protect me during this pandemic provoked by a human plague.